Hi there. Today's guest is cellist Carter Brey. A prize winner at multiple international competitions, Carter has gone on to be a soloist with virtually every major orchestra in the world, and is now the principal cellist with the New York Philharmonic. He's a very well-rounded musician and a fantastic person. I know you're going to enjoy this. This series was conducted in the spring of 2020 via Instagram, and the audio and video quality do reflect that format. However, the words and insights of these guests are still priceless.
Okay.
How's the weather up there on the Upper West Side?
Up here on the 9th floor, we have our own discrete weather system happening here.
All right, so
it's raining sensible shoes up here.
I already start this off where I talk a little bit about the person I'm interviewing. This is the fourth interview now. For those of you who don't know, Carter Brey is a virtuoso cellist. He was a prize winner at multiple international competitions. This helped him to launch a successful solo career, and that solo career saw him performing as a soloist with virtually every major orchestra in the world. And then fast forward to 1996, he became the principal cellist of the New York Philharmonic and made his solo debut with the Philharmonic playing Tchaikovsky Rococo Variations. He continues to be a soloist with the orchestra and playing with small ensembles such as the recently formed New York Philharmonic String Quartet, which is wonderful. And here he is. And we're going to talk about lots of stuff. Happy coffee.
And I'm equipped with my coffee in my New York Philharmonic mug.
There you go. And you love to sail. And I have a very quick story to tell. In 2005, I think, I was looking for a sailboat. I'll make this very, very quick. I was looking for a sailboat, so I started doing my research online. I found this small, inexpensive sailboat, and I was trying to get some more information about the boat, and I noticed that one person had posted a lot of details about the boat, meticulous details and photos, and I started writing to this person on this website, and I would receive friendly, detailed replies. And this went back and forth and back and forth. And then eventually, maybe the 6th or 7th email in, conversation just about this sailboat, there was a small link that I noticed on the website that said, "Who am I?" And that person is Carter Brey. That's how I met Carter Brey. It wasn't.
That was actually an existential question.
It was through the love of sailing. And we've been fast friends since then. And we haven't really played much music together yet.
No, it's funny because your viewers should know that we've sailed probably hundreds of miles together easily. Yeah. But we've never played together.
Well, you're very, very busy. So I want to jump right in because you have such an incredible workload with the Philharmonic. And week in, week out, it's maddening. I don't know how you keep it together. You have to keep your chops up like an Olympian athlete, and then be ready for the next week's program. Because for those who don't know, the orchestra does new music every week, and it's not small stuff. It's stuff that goes from, a few days of rehearsal to performing at the highest level. And
it can be maddening and impossible, and it even goes beyond that description because there's a curious aspect to our weekly schedule, which is called the carryover concert. So a typical week will go like Tuesday morning. We'll start rehearsing the new program for that week. That night, we will play the 4th iteration of the previous week's program. So we can be practicing Bruckner or Mahler Tuesday morning, and then that night, maybe we're playing Haydn or Mozart with a reduced orchestra. And then, of course, the next day, Wednesday, we have a double rehearsal with that week's program, and then Thursday, a dress, and then Thursday night, the first iteration of 4. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Tuesday, and the cycle begins. And it can feel a bit like being a hamster in a cage sometimes.
But that's okay, because you got Monday to just learn all the music for the next week.
Oh, no, wait. Monday's when we have to do all our teaching.
So how do you the thing that when I first thought about asking you to do this interview, I wanted to ask about something that is universal to all musicians, and that's the idea of efficient practice and focus. Because certainly there must have been a time in your life when you were spending 6-8 hours a day in the practice room and
Absolutely.
building that stuff, building all these skills, but you don't have time for that now. There's no way that you could have time for that. So how does your focused practice work, and what does that look like?
I think that's a gift of time and experience, and just being older, because you've been doing it for a long time. You tend to become much more efficient with experience. And I think that's because it's probably a matter of pattern recognition, which is simply another way of saying that you recognize structure in music. It's like when I am trying to help my students learn how to sight read, I say, well, you need to have a strong basis in theory, functional harmony, so that you can recognize patterns as they're coming up on the page. It's like looking at a film strip, and the present moment is when you're looking through the viewfinder, and the stuff that's coming up is coming up on the right, and the stuff that you just played is going away on the left, or whatever direction. And it's something that functions in time. But if you recognize patterns, then you can plug in pre-programmed responses, so to speak. In other words, things that you've practiced over the years. And it's the same thing just with learning a new piece. You sit down and, in fact, I was just talking to a student about this a couple of hours ago. He's learning a new piece by Benjamin Britten, and he was kind of throwing his arms up in the air saying, this is really hard to memorize. And so I said, well, let's just sit down and unpack this piece bar by bar. And we can look for patterns. Look, this is like a small micro phrase that repeats at a different tonal level. So right there, you have a key that will give you a shortcut. So you learn to recognize shortcuts like that, I think, with time. And I'm sure that's the case with all of us musicians, no matter what genre we're working in.
Sure, certainly. And for people in the jazz and pop world, it's familiarity with the harmony and the language and all of that stuff, but we're not preparing nearly the volume of music that you have to prepare every week. That's the part that's so daunting to me is the sheer amount of complex music.
It's a lot, but also I think the other thing that makes it easier as time goes by is that a lot of the repertoire repeats. It comes by in cycles. The canonic repertoire, the last 3 Tchaikovsky symphonies, many of the Beethovens, maybe the last 4 or 5 Mozarts, the same major piano concertos and violin concertos, they tend to come back every couple of seasons. So I remember at the beginning of my career, I was shitting bricks over things like the Shostakovich Fifth Symphony or the Tchaikovsky Sixth Symphony, things like that. It was all new to me. By now, those particular pieces that I just mentioned, I probably played them each at least 50 times.
Wow. So
when I go up to the library to take them out, I see my handwriting all over these parts. Which just goes to show me that I've been there many times. It's like a tomcat marking his territory. But you're familiar with these pieces, even though they're multi-movement pieces that go on for 40-45 minutes. You've seen it before, and you know where the difficulties lie. And so you sit down at home, put the music on your stand, you immediately go to that place. Even a monster like the Mahler Fifth Symphony, I mean, off the top of my head, that's the most difficult standard repertoire item I can think of. I'll bring it home, I sit down, I immediately put the second part of the first movement on the stand, and I know all of the bars that are difficult. The third movement, I know all of the tricky bars. I just refamiliarize myself with the fingerings for those. It becomes a streamlined process as the years go by. Now, that said, it's very funny because now increasingly I'll see a piece come up on the weekly schedule, and I'll go, Scriabin's Second Symphony. I've never even heard that piece before. So I'll go up to the library and I say, Larry, our principal librarian, I've got to get the cello part of the Scriabin Second Symphony. He pulls it out for me, and I'll look at it, and there are my fingerings and bowings. My handwriting is all over it from like 15 or 20 years ago.
Oh, boy.
I just expunged it from my mind. So that happens too.
Yeah, well,
That's scary.
but you know, if you have all these performances of a particular piece of work under your belt, we know that some work, the interpretation is fairly standard, and there's a preferred interpretation, but conductors and orchestras will change that quite a bit. And so the way that the orchestra plays under one conductor could be considerably different than under another conductor.
Yes,
and,
that's very true. You have to be flexible. You have to have not just great listening skills, but analysis skills. So you understand exactly what the conductor is asking for and why. Which brings up another interesting topic. I don't know if you want to get into it, but that has to bear very specifically on the audition process. Because I find that a lot of young players who are auditioning for the first time are worried about meeting some sort of template, satisfying some sort of exact template of how we want things to be played. And nothing could be further from the truth, precisely for the reason you just mentioned. Really good orchestra players, while it's true that there's sort of a range of standard interpretations, there is a range, and we have limited rehearsal time. So we need to choose players who are able to make quick musical decisions and understand those decisions and execute them one way or the other, according to who's on the podium.
Right. Do you ever find yourself, at least in small part, disagreeing with the guest conductor's interpretation of a piece that you've played many times?
Absolutely. Yes,
are there ever, without calling anybody out, are there ever minor revolts? Is there ever an inclination to, because you have a lot of power as a section leader, you could push your section one way or another emotionally, and you could say, this is, this isn't right. I want to see if I can move this along, or I can.
Well, I think my power as a section leader has to be used in the right way. And I never forget that we all of us are interested in a final product that's good. And we want to get there smoothly, no lumps or bumps. We want the work environment to be good. So yes, while it's true, I may have disagreements with some interpretive aspect. Really what we are there for is to function as a very, very skilled machine that will produce the conductor's concept of a piece. It's not our job to impose our concept. Now, we do make 100 micro decisions a second as to what we're going to do, sound articulation, not to mention the basics like intonation and articulation. But we all want to be on the same page, and we want to help the conductor realize his or her interpretation. That's how I see my job. That said, there have been, thankfully, very few instances, but there have been instances where I felt that the conductor was being vague and had not been specific enough. And so that in a very subtle way, I took it upon myself to try to steer a tempo to keep things moving along if I felt the conductor was not doing enough to ensure that the music had the right kind of impetus. It's extremely rare, but it has happened on a couple of occasions. And taking matters into our own hands as section leaders has nothing to do with ego or anything like that. We want a really good artistic product. So really it's done on a very subtle level, so that the audience is only aware of beautiful music being made. Uh, if it's obvious that I or another section player, section principal is doing something like that, then it's gone too far.
Yeah, yeah. Understood. Understood. Well, it's so interesting, and hearing you talk about all this, I could go any number of places with what I want to ask next. But talking about the audience experience, the New York Philharmonic is one of the big orchestras, historically one of the big five, and maybe now they're expanding that idea to be the big eight or big 10 or American orchestras at least, and one of the world premier orchestras. Would you guess that your audience consists of more educated lay people than another orchestral audience? And this is a much larger and complex question about the audience understanding this very complicated music and receiving it and being moved by it in enough of a way that it feels attractive to them. Because I think for a lot of public audience, even some educated lay people, they could be left cold because they don't understand what's happening with the orchestra. They don't understand what's happening with the music, especially depending on the program. For them, for a lot of people, the program might be unfamiliar. And what do you think about the cross-section of the audience? What have you experienced with that audience?
Yeah. You see levels of understanding across the board, at least from what I see on stage and what I have learned from talking to people afterwards. I think at one extreme, you see people fall asleep almost immediately.
It could be very documentary.
Yeah. Let me tell you, that is one expensive nap. There are subscribers that we recognize. We've even given them nicknames. We call them the narcoleptics. They show up regularly, and right after the downbeat, they fall asleep. It's very cute. They fall asleep against each other like this. And then they wake up when the applause starts at the end of the piece, and they look very pleased and well rested. You know, if that's your goal for spending hundreds of dollars for really good seats at the New York Philharmonic, then I can't argue with that. And at the other extreme, you have very passionate listeners who are very deeply engaged and deeply invested in the experience of being inside the musical flow right along with us. I can see that. I've seen people extremely moved to the point of tears. I'll never forget many decades ago, as a very young player, a member of the Cleveland Orchestra, we were on tour in Budapest, and we were playing the Bartók Concerto for Orchestra at the Erkel Theater in Budapest. And I remember looking out, we were playing the last movement, which has this fantastic motoric energy. It's maybe the most life-affirming music written in the 20th century. And I looked out briefly to the first row in front of me, and there was a woman sitting there who was literally doing this. She was bouncing up and down in her seat with excitement and joy at what she was hearing. And I thought that was fantastic.
Wow.
I've never forgotten that. That was, like 40 years ago. So I see the whole range of reactions and experience. People to whom it's an extremely important thing to be present and for whom this music is very meaningful. And, people to whom perhaps it's more of a social occasion, people who will sit through a piece of new music patiently but not really comprehending, and other people who are very open and immediately are open to the experience of a new piece of music. I've seen this many times, actually. We did recently a piece by Julia Wolfe called Fire in My Mouth, about the Triangle Shirtwaist fire that killed so many young women, most of whom were immigrants, and it had a tremendous impact. The whole, not just the music, which was stunning and beautiful, but the whole staging and the drama of it. It really, it grabbed people in a visceral way. It was great to see. So you see it all. You see it all from on stage.
Well, I think this is going to be important for the future of orchestras to find a way to bridge the gap of understanding. And I'd rather see efforts to get the audience to understand the music rather than the music to be watered down, like going back to the sort of trotted out classics that have been trotted.
Sure.
They're fine, and Pop's concerts where you say, okay, well, now we're going to play some music that's not nearly as evolved as a lot of the music that shows up on your program.
Right.
And I think
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that whatever anybody thinks, I think Dudamel is doing a nice job with getting the audience engaged in that fashion.
I was going to say that our administration has been really excellent that way. I think they found a very good balance with, providing, a constant feed of the canonic classics, but also, and they're doing this in tandem with Jaap van Zweden, our new music director, as well. He's been very good with this, as was the previous music director, Alan Gilbert, with soliciting new music by exciting young composers. Every single week, the season until the season was truncated, we had some really interesting new stuff. We were doing this Project 19 in commemoration of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. There was a newly commissioned piece by a female composer every single week. And while that was challenging for us technically, it was great for the audience, and the audience really ate it up. It resulted in some very, very viscerally affecting and exciting and very beautiful music. It was nice to be part of that project. I have to put it in the past tense now, but I'll put it in the future tense as well.
In the future tense, yeah.
It'll happen again. We'll take the thread of that project up once we start playing concerts again.
Yeah. And what do you think about even going further with that, and the idea that within reason, that audience members could react emotionally, vocally more than they do? Another part of, I know that's a strange question, but something that happens in jazz concerts is people are vocal. They're vocal after solos, and obviously you don't want to ruin the listening experience. You don't want to end up with a football stadium sound inside of the concert hall. But
right.
I think that something about the idea of remaining silent and keeping so much silence, and I'm not opting for more coughing or more crinkling of papers, because certainly we have lots of that. But the idea that there could be more emotional engagement from the audience in a way. Yeah. I wonder how that happens, or if it's discussed or frowned upon, or do you have thoughts about
that's it's something that happened probably in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, where people this became calcified into the way you're supposed to respond to this, and it wasn't always that way. Venetian opera in the 16th century, people used to wander back and forth, in their visiting people between boxes, and then they would yell comments at the stage, or they'd clap after a nice aria, which they still do in opera, I suppose. And somehow it became a very formalized event, right down to the way we dress. We wear white tie and tails. Now, it's a very comfortable way to dress for a concert, but that's beside the point. White tie and tails, somehow we've become caught in amber wearing clothes that were current in 1820. That's probably no accident, because that was about the time when the bourgeois class, middle class, came into being in Europe, And that was how classical music concerts that one would take out a subscription for came into being. It was the very existence of that class that made our kind of music possible. And somehow, like Hasidim in Williamsburg, we've never moved past that in the way we dress for concerts. And I'm the first to acknowledge that. It's a little bit silly. Many orchestras are trying to address that in various ways. It is nice to dress up to reflect the fact that it's an event, but why should it have to make us look like we're stuck in 1820?
Right. You can respect the event and
Right.
make yourself a presentation without looking like that. And just the emotional. I don't know if that's ever going to change, the idea about people being verbally emotional. But I'll tell you that when I was the last time I heard the orchestra and I heard Mahler, I felt like jumping up and down during certain modulations. I thought, oh my God, it's so incredible. I just want to scream how great it is and how beautiful the performance was.
Yeah.
Instead, just sitting there,
Of course, there probably is some part of me that would love to have people break into applause when I finish playing the cello solo in the slow movement of the Brahms Second Piano Concerto. It would be completely inappropriate. I mean, the music doesn't stop there. The difference between that and, let's say, applauding for a traditional jazz solo is the difference in nature between a jazz chart and a piece like the Brahms Second Piano Concerto, which is, it's a narrative that doesn't repeat it for a good 12 minutes, that single movement,
Yeah.
Whereas in a jazz chart, you've got a repeating sequence of harmonies, and if
Sometimes.
the audience, sometimes. I'm talking about very traditional, So if you take a solo, if you take a solo, keyboard solo, and then the chart comes around again, and everybody knows that it's going to go, 1 2 5 1 or whatever, 1 4 2 5 1. It won't be a tragedy if people miss the move to 2, and they knew that 5 is coming, and then you'll be back to your tonic, and then somebody else take a solo. With the Brahms, as soon as I finish playing my solo, the piano comes in, the piano soloist comes in and moves the narrative forward. So it's different.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I feel like doing the same thing with a great Mahler modulation. It's so extraordinary.
Yeah.
And you have to sit there and go, or my stand partner and I might go, and yeah, it's a little frustrating that way, but that's the nature of the beast somehow.
Well, this is a good opportunity for me to move to something that I talked to you about earlier in the week because I was curious about it, and that's the idea of inspiration, emotion, and passion. And Carter's got a beautiful TEDx talk and very well-written essay on inspiration. And because I talked with Jim Beard last week, and I think Larry Goldings earlier this week about inspiration. And for composers, that's a thing. And we discussed how it's elusive and it's not consistent. Carter, do you want to give us the Cliff's Notes version of your essay? Because I thought it was really great. But
it's like the Monty Python competition for reciting Proust in as few seconds as possible. No, I mean, basically, I was interested in writing my thoughts down about that because I kept encountering people who, even among professionals, who thought that you couldn't have a good concert without being inspired. So my first thought was, well, what does it really mean? What are they talking about when they say inspired? What does that mean exactly? Does that mean you should look like one of those Bernini sculptures of a saint receiving the holy word where they're going like this? Which kind of interferes with your chops, What does that mean exactly? And then I would then I was questioning the whole concept of what they were talking about. I thought, well, this is something I do every single day of my professional life, no matter what else is going on, no matter how I feel, what else has happened that day. But I'm always expected to play a great concert. That's my job. Is it my job to feel inspired? So I gave a lot of thought to that, and it helped me to sort of focus in on what my true feelings are about that. And I realized that inspiration really functions on different levels. And the one that most lay people think is important to us is in reality the least important level. And that's how you're feeling at the moment where you're performing on stage live for paying customers. And what's really the most important for us, I realized, was the kind of inspiration that got us interested in being musicians in the first place. Sort of background process of evoking passion, lighting the fire for that love of music. That's truly important. That's why education is so important. That's why it's important to have music in the home.
Yeah.
That was the kind of inspiration that I got from my parents as a 5-year-old when they took me to see Porgy and Bess, and the kind of inspiration I got from my teachers as a kid, my music teachers in the public school system where I grew up in northern Westchester. And I realized that to function as a professional means letting go of the concept that you need to be inspired at the moment. And what's really important is to meet a professional level, a very high level, which depends much more on preparation. And to meet that bar every single time you go on stage. And if you suddenly are visited by that spontaneous muse that most people think defines inspiration, that's great. And we've all had that. I've had so many memorable experiences like that. But my goal is to make what people perceive on the other side of the stage a very, very tiny difference. That I always want to hit that high mark, that high bar. And that has to do with daily preparation. And the daily preparation is the direct result of the fire and the passion that was ignited in me by my parents and my teachers so many years ago.
Yeah.
So that's the Cliff Notes version, really.
I think it's really smart. And actually, after talking with you about it, it made a lot of sense to me. And I see a lot of parallels even in improvising music, because when we tour, we're not always up and ready to go. We get ready to go on the stage. We're not always feeling like we want to be going on the stage.
Yeah.
But we need to be there 100%. We need to show up 100% and have the passion, or try to have the passion that's required for the work. Yes. Whether we're playing anything that's coming from inspiration or not, or whether that well feels dry that night.
Absolutely.
But showing up is a must, and with all the skills. Well, I mean, showing up emotionally is a must.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I thought, because I wasn't sure when I saw the TED Talk, and then I wanted to clear it with you, and I think it's so smart what you're saying about that idea.
Right. Yeah, I don't think professionals should beat themselves up if they can't have that same peak experience night after night. It's not possible. If you're a human being, it is not possible.
Yeah.
The smartest, most cogent encapsulation of that thought I ever saw was from Janos Starker, the cellist. He said, "Don't get excited, create excitement." Our job as professionals, as opposed to being amateurs, is to enable our listeners to experience the passionate message of the composer, not to get up and make a spectacle of ourselves. I submit that that's antithetical to that first goal. I think the more you can maintain that very sober policeman, some down deep inside you, that ensures that you're always going to play that run cleanly, that you're always going to be paying attention to voicings, to the structure, those are the things that go into creating an artistic experience. Art is all about imposing structure on something, not the opposite. And the more you can exert and maintain that discipline, the freer your audience will be to experience that composer's message.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think
That's why we spend hours in the practice room. You know, I mean,
yeah.
It seems onerous and tedious and every other Greek and Latin word you can think of. But man, when you get up on stage, you have to forget about all of that. That needs to be forgotten. And the only way you can forget about that is to obsess over it in your practice room, right?
That's right. That's right. And then practice the art of focus and just being present there. That's
right. That's also difficult. And then, of course, that brings up the subject of nerves, which many, I think, especially classical musicians suffer from, because like stage actors, we have to go out on stage and reproduce somebody else's text verbatim without making mistakes. And I know from talking to Wynton Marsalis years ago, that's why he stopped doing that, because he felt that this, back in the days when he was doing both and sort of straddling both disciplines.
Playing classical repertoire.
Correct. He gave it up eventually because he felt that it for him, it had become more about not fucking up. And I understand that. Sometimes it does feel like that. I have my good friend Emmanuel Axe, the concert pianist. And whenever I see him backstage before he goes out to play, he says, I hope I don't fuck up. And of course he never does. And it's, he's a fabulous artist. And I understand why he does that. That's his totem. It's his way of sort of warding off that evil by bringing it up. Some of us don't even mention that. We're afraid of mentioning it. Other people will sort of think it's healthier to just like get it out. We all have our ways of dealing with it. Leonard Bernstein used to kiss. He had inherited cufflinks from his mentor, Serge Kouzovitsky. He would always kiss the cufflinks before going out on stage. So we all have our ways of dealing with that. But it's important to be able to deal with that, because if you don't, then you have that voice in your head as you're on stage trying to reproduce this composer's thought process. And if you have that voice in the back of your head going, oh, careful, here's that sequence, don't get lost here. Or let's see, do I shift on the half step here? Do I cross strings here? That all has to be dealt with in the home, in your practice room, calmly, with the full recognizance that that will come and overwhelm you if you have not put in that preparation. Yeah. Well, we've all been there. And my students constantly are asking me about that. It's something that they're preoccupied with. And so I have to tell them, look, there's no magic bullet. It's all about the preparation and experience, too.
Right.
So I always tell them, try stuff out for your friends. Because once you're out there, there's no reproducing that experience.
Yeah. Since you're talking about nerves and preparation, I'm curious more about the audition process. Obviously, you have auditioned a decent bit in your life, and you're successful at it, as evidenced by your current position and previous positions. But it's daunting, and I remember my classical auditions. I'm a recovered trumpet player who used to play orchestral excerpts, and I used to audition at Interlochen summer camp, and every week it would be challenges, and you'd be playing excerpts, and that's a small taste of what an orchestral audition must be like. I mean, that was meant to be prep for orchestral auditions, but it's nerve-wracking going into that room and thinking about, you know, your prep and all that, and it must be very challenging for you. You've shared with me the long schedules of audition days where you're trying to select replacement players, etc.
That's on our side of the screen.
On your side, right? Yeah, as somebody who hears auditions and as somebody who's done auditions, can you talk a little bit more about that? About the pitfalls? You talked about the idea that players try to fit into a mold, but aside from that, just the preparation and potential surprises and how people perceive this on both sides of the screen.
Yeah. I think orchestral auditions probably are the most difficult aspect of being a classical musician. They're antithetical to almost every musical value you hold, because you're given, like in the first round, you're given maybe 6 minutes. You walk out. At the Philharmonic, we have we go to great lengths to ensure anonymity of the candidates. So there's a curtain. So the committee sits on one side of the curtain and the candidate plays on the other side. They tape down a carpet strip from the entrance to the stage to the place where the candidate will stand, so that we can't hear their footfalls in case a woman is wearing heels. So that we can't immediately identify them as female, that sort of thing. And they're not allowed to talk. Everything is done through the personnel manager. So we go to great lengths to ensure that the process is fair that way and depersonalized and to that extent. But beyond that, you're given a few minutes to show yourself at your best, and that's really barely enough time just to get over your nerves, really. So they might start with a movement of a concerto, and then they have to play a movement of solo Bach. And then we go on to the excerpts, and the excerpts are just little snippets of pieces of standard orchestral repertoire. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, a Mahler Fifth, or a Strauss tone poem, a Tchaikovsky symphony. Hard, standard, well-known but very difficult excerpts that are chosen. Each one is chosen to highlight a certain aspect of technical or musical difficulty. And these excerpts typically will last no more than 30 seconds. Think about that. So you walk out, you're facing a black curtain, a voice, in this case mine, will say, "Thank you for coming, welcome, what would you like to start with?" So they'll start with their concerto, they go on to Bach, and then we'll start asking these excerpts of them. Who can be expected to do their best under those circumstances? It takes a tremendous amount of preparation and psychological discipline to be able to do that. Even in my own case, I remember my audition, if you'll bear with me here for a second, I was invited directly to the finals, so there was no curtain in my case. But I walked out, I sat down. The audition committee, with Kurt Masur sitting in the center like Jesus, looked just like Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. And they said, "What would you like to start with?" And I said, "I'll start with the Dvorak concerto." And so, I'd been preparing for months for this, hours, every day. I thought, yeah, I'm ready for this. So I sat down, the pianist played a short bit of the introduction, and the solo cello part goes like this. And so forth. Well, so I began with a big flourish, and my first note, the very first note, was really sharp. It's like, and I immediately had to adjust like that. And I thought, great, I just fucked up my audition. Why should I even bother to keep playing? But I did. I mean, I was an experienced professional, so I got past that point, and I just thought, okay, you've got to put that behind you now. Just keep playing. It's going to be fine. And it was. And I'm sure I blew it up in my head, but still, that's the kind of thing you have to deal with, because you're expected to play everything perfectly. And to overcome a deficit like that is a real measure of somebody's ability to rein in these impulses that are coming from some lower part of your brain, you know.
That's interesting, because the audition process then would seem to be really effective at determining certain essential aspects of a high pressure player. But it also could be that you might miss a player who simply has a bad nerves problem.
Absolutely. Yes.
Which is unfortunate. And
it's very unfortunate.
But that's been the process the entire 20th century.
Yeah. On the other hand, our job in an orchestra like the New York Philharmonic, there's tremendous pressure, even for non-principal players, non-title players who don't play solos. It's a lot of pressure. It can be self-imposed, or it can be imposed by people in the section sitting around you, because they expect that you, if you're a section player, they expect that you are able to, even from sitting, let's say you're sitting in the back of the cello section, that means you're probably a good 35 feet away from the conductor's podium. It's a ridiculous way to make music if you think about it. And that means that you're 70 feet away from the backstand players of the first violins. Just think about that for a second. It's just ridiculous. It's antithetical to the whole idea of making live music, but that's our reality as orchestra players. So your stand partner, the people immediately in front of you and in back of you, depend on you being able to fit in like a puzzle piece. You can't play too early. Your releases can't be too late. You have to blend your sound. You can't stick out. And that's a lot. It's a lot. That's what I meant when I say that every player is making micro decisions at every moment. That's constantly going through everyone's head. You're monitoring, you're listening, you're monitoring, and you're responding, and you're anticipating at the same time. That's why I used the film strip analogy earlier in our talk. It does feel that way. You have to be present in the present moment, but you also have to relate it to what's just gone by and what's about to happen. Also, you know, if you're sitting in the back of the section along with everybody else, you have to have the sophistication to be able to respond to, let's say, a woodwind solo. So if we're playing, let's see, what's a good example? Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto, slow movement, there's a flute solo. Da, 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 ya, da, 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 da. Everybody knows that tune. But the flute player has to take breaths occasionally. And there's going to be, you know, some flexibility to the phrasing. So we're all playing there. We're playing an accompaniment to that. And the accompaniment has to be precisely together, but it has to be anticipating the freedoms and the breathtakings of the flute player. That's just one example, and that happens constantly in every program that we play. So there's a lot of pressure on everybody on stage to manifest a very high degree of musicianship and instrumental ability. So that was a big circle that I just made. The pressure that is put on them in an audition situation is not altogether a bad thing. It might be unfair because, yes, you're right, we may miss some highly talented players, but the ability to respond to pressure is part of the audition.
Yeah.
They have to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And actually, you brought up a good point about listening in because it's not possible that the greatest, most metronomically precise conductor couldn't possibly steer 80 musicians through the minutia of all the details of the flute player taking breaths. And moreover, I remember hearing the orchestra with Gergiev, and you were doing Stravinsky, and it was so incredibly rhythmically complex. And I just thought, how without a pulse are all of these sections staying together? And certainly that's a lot of another type of listening.
Yes.
Through odd meters. And does that require that that you become largely familiar with the other parts that are not in your section, so that you have a reference point? Because I know playing in a band, if I've got a complex piece of music, then I could listen to, I say, oh, the guitar's going to do this, and the drummer's going to do this, and
Absolutely. I think that's the responsible thing to do. It's selectively true. Very often we'll bring full scores if we're doing a really a beast of a piece, like certain Strauss tone poems. The less common ones, let's say an Alpine Symphony by Strauss. That's not that familiar, but it's very complex. And I remember we did it fairly recently, and I remember bringing the full score to the rehearsals because there were many places where I really needed to figure out exactly who was doing what, so that we could fit in. And I do see a lot of people do that. They bring full scores to the rehearsals, and we just keep them by our feet on the floor, and we'll just discreetly flip to the page that we need to look at. It doesn't mean that we have the same kind of familiarity with the full score that the conductor will. Of course, we don't have time for that, but we do need to have score reading ability, so that in those instances where there's so much going on, and the rhythmic complexity is of such a nature that it requires a very detailed familiarity, we do have that resource to fall back on. Absolutely.
I found that fascinating when I heard some really complex music, and I think I asked you about it after the performance, of just about people staying together. And because if you get off the rails there, it's going to be a massive train wreck. You might as well just put instruments down.
Absolutely. And I think lay audiences tend to overestimate the importance of the baton beat, because by the time we come to the performance, the organizational work has been done. And while we all appreciate a clear beat, and that does help a lot, there are certain conductors who do not have a clear beat. They may be wonderful musicians with fantastic musical ideas that are fun to work with, but they may be very vague. Gergiev is a perfect example.
Yeah, that's why I was watching, and I thought
I've seen him show up with a chopstick because he just come from across the street having dinner at Shanli. He's obviously a great musician.
Yeah.
But it's a little hard to follow his gestures, and so we have to be able to be with him in a general sense, but to be able to actually make the vertical elements in the score fall together precisely. That's really on us.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating and impressive, and if anybody watching hasn't seen the New York Phil recently, you should go watch when you can again.
I think that's an online experience for the foreseeable future,
right.
Unfortunately.
I think we're going to run out of time here pretty soon. Do you have any further thoughts?
No, I think you hit a lot of really big, important themes, and it's fun to talk about them and sort of test them too. But I think basically what we're talking about, if we had to sum it up, speaking of Cliff Notes, it's all about listening in the end. If you're not listening, you shouldn't be there. Yeah, you shouldn't be on the stage.
Yeah, and actually, for anybody watching, you should know that Carter is Carter is very well versed in a lot of modern music and a lover of the Beatles and a lover of lots of other great modern music and modern jazz and modern pop music. And so.
And I sometimes skulk around at Henry's concerts. I've been known to do that.
Anyway, it was so great to talk to you today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Henry. That was a fun interview. All right.
Yeah. Take care.
You too. Bye. Bye.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of The Right Key. If you enjoyed the episode, there's a lot more coming. Please click the subscribe and like buttons below. If you want to know more about me or our guests, you can find lots of information in the link just below the video. See you next time.